Imagine waking up tomorrow and all the trees have disappeared. No, it's not a science fiction story. It's a thought experiment that will change your view of the world. In just 24 hours, global temperatures would soar. Thousands of species would collapse, and the air we breathe, well, it would never be the same again. What do you think would happen to humanity? How long would we survive? And more importantly, is there technology capable of replacing the work that trees have been doing for free for millions of years? Get ready for an impressive journey through the first moments of a planet without trees. What you're about to discover will transform your view of these silent giants that, at this very moment, are keeping you alive. This is the story of the day Earth lost its guardians. It's not just your street. Across the entire planet Earth, in the blink of an eye, all trees have vanished without a trace. From the majestic sequoias of California to the ancient African baobabs, from the dense Amazon rainforests to the temperate woods of Europe. All gone. This is not just an exercise in imagination or a dystopian nightmare. It's a portal to deeply understand our vital connection with these extraordinary beings that have been shaping the face of our planet for over 370 million years. In the first minutes after the inexplicable disappearance, an unsettling silence settles across the world. It's as if the planet itself is holding its breath, stunned by the magnitude of the loss. In large urban centers, people stop in the streets, looking confused at the empty spaces where centuries-old trees once stood. In parks, now transformed into barren plains, children point to the exposed sky, asking their parents where their favorite trees have gone. But the initial silence soon gives way to growing chaos. On slopes and hills around the world, the sound of crumbling earth echoes like a grim omen. The roots of trees, which for decades or centuries held the soil in place, simply no longer exist. Within minutes, landslides begin to occur in various regions of the planet. In the forests, or what's left of them, the impact is even more dramatic. Millions of nests, once protected among branches and foliage, are exposed to the open air. Entire flocks of birds circle disoriented, their homes and reference points completely erased from existence. Monkeys and other arboreal primates, suddenly deprived of their natural habitat, find themselves literally groundless. As the sun rises in the sky in this first day without trees, drastic changes begin to manifest in the atmosphere. The air, previously naturally filtered and humidified by vegetation, becomes heavier and drier. In large cities, where trees acted as natural purifiers, air quality deteriorates rapidly. The concentration of pollutants increases alarmingly, creating a toxic haze that hangs over the metropolises. The temperature also begins to rise worryingly. Without the protective shade of tree canopies, the soil is directly exposed to solar radiation. In urban areas where asphalt and concrete already contribute to the heat island effect, thermometers soar. Places that were once cool refuges under the shade of trees now record temperatures up to 5 degrees Celsius above normal. In former forested areas, the situation is even more extreme. The soil, previously protected by layers of vegetation, is exposed not only to heat, but also to winds. The absence of trees creates a domino effect on the local microclimate. The air, humidity, which was previously maintained through the process of evapotranspiration of trees, drops drastically. In some regions, relative air humidity plummets more than 30% in a matter of hours. The disappearance of trees represents a death sentence for countless species that directly depended on them. In the first hours, the most visible impacts are observed among birds and primates. Species that lived exclusively in tree canopies suddenly find themselves without habitat. Spider monkeys in the Amazon, orangutans in Borneo, and lemurs in Madagascar wander disoriented across the exposed ground, vulnerable to predators and without access to their usual food sources. But it's the less visible impacts that begin to weave an even more complex web of destruction. Under the soil, a silent revolution is underway. The mycorrhizal fungi, which lived in symbiosis with tree roots, begin to die. These microscopic structures, fundamental to soil health and the nutrient cycle, initiate a decomposition process that will profoundly alter soil chemistry. As the first day without trees progresses, the transformations in Earth's atmosphere become increasingly evident. The role of trees as natural regulators of the carbon cycle becomes painfully clear in their absence. With each passing hour, approximately 8,000 tons of carbon dioxide that would naturally be absorbed by trees remain floating in the atmosphere. In large urban centers, where trees functioned as natural filters, air quality deteriorates dramatically. Dust particles, previously captured by leaves and branches, now float freely in the air. The characteristic smell of ground-level ozone, that metallic odor typical of pollution, becomes more intense. People with respiratory problems begin to feel the first symptoms of discomfort. In regions that previously housed large forests, such as the Amazon, Congo, and Southeast Asia, the changes are even more dramatic. The process known as the biotic pump, where trees created their own moisture circulation systems, ceases completely. The Amazon's flying rivers, responsible for transporting moisture to large portions of South America, simply cease to exist. As the second day without trees begins, the cascading effects on ecosystems become devastating. In former forested areas, the absence of tree canopy exposes previously shaded soil to an unprecedented amount of sunlight. Soil temperature soars, causing mass death of microorganisms essential for soil fertility. Insects are particularly affected. Bees, which depend on the nectar of tree flowers for survival, begin to die en masse. Butterflies, beetles, and other insects that use trees as shelter are exposed to predators and extreme weather conditions. This loss has an immediate domino effect on the pollination of agricultural crops and wild plants. In former tropical forests, where biodiversity was most concentrated, the scenario is apocalyptic. Thousands of species of epiphytic orchids which grew attached to tree trunks die rapidly without their vital support. As the second day without trees begins, the cascading effects on ecosystems become devastating. In former forested areas, the absence of tree canopy exposes previously shaded soil to an unprecedented amount of sunlight. Soil temperature soars, causing mass death of microorganisms essential for soil fertility. Insects are particularly affected. Bees, which depend on the nectar of tree flowers for survival, begin to die en masse. Butterflies, beetles, and other insects that use trees as shelter are exposed to predators and extreme weather conditions. This loss has an immediate domino effect on the pollination of agricultural crops and wild plants. In former tropical forests, where biodiversity was most concentrated, the scenario is apocalyptic. Thousands of species of epiphytic orchids which grew attached to tree trunks die rapidly without their vital support. Bromeliads, which formed small miniature ecosystems in tree canopies, dry up under the merciless sun, taking with them entire communities of small amphibians and insects. The absence of trees quickly reveals their crucial role in the water cycle. Without deep roots to absorb and redistribute water in the soil, the first changes in hydrological patterns begin to appear. Springs that depended on the presence of trees to maintain their flow begin to dry up. Small streams, previously protected by vegetation shade, start to evaporate more quickly. In mountainous regions, where trees regulated the flow of rainwater, the first signs of erosion appear. Rainwater, without the interception of canopies and root absorption, runs directly downhill, carrying precious layers of fertile soil with it. Within days, former forested areas begin to show signs of transformation into arid landscapes. The impact on global agriculture begins to manifest in unexpected ways. Crops that depended on the protection of natural windbreaks are exposed to strong winds, causing physical damage to plantations. The absence of trees also dramatically affects local rainfall patterns, creating drier conditions in many important agricultural regions. Farmers who practiced agroforestry systems, combining trees with agricultural crops, are particularly affected. The beneficial microclimate created by the presence of trees disappears, exposing sensitive crops to extreme conditions. Coffee and cocoa crops, which traditionally grew under the protection of larger trees, begin to show signs of severe stress. The global economy enters crisis mode. The timber industry, which employed millions of people worldwide, collapses instantly. Industries that depended on forest products, from paper to furniture, face a reality of unprecedented scarcity. The price of existing wood skyrockets, causing a wave of speculation and hoarding. Traditional communities and indigenous peoples, who directly depended on forests for their subsistence, face an immediate humanitarian crisis. Non-timber forest products, such as fruits, nuts, resins, and natural medicines, simply cease to exist. Millions of people who depended on these resources for their income and food suddenly find themselves without means of subsistence. As the first week without trees is completed, climate changes become frighteningly evident. The planet begins to experience unprecedented accelerated warming. Trees, which previously sequestered about 2.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually, are no longer present to perform this vital service. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere begins to rise at an alarming rate. Weather satellites capture dramatic changes in atmospheric circulation patterns. Where large tropical forests once existed, anomalous high-pressure zones form. The evaporative cooling effect, previously provided by billions of trees, ceases completely. Global temperatures increase by an average of 0.5 degrees Celsius in just this first week, a change that would normally take decades to occur. In former forest regions, daytime temperatures soar to record levels. The Amazon, previously known for its humid and relatively stable climate, begins to show extreme thermal variations. During the day, the exposed soil heats up quickly, creating pockets of hot air that distort the landscape. At night, without the protection of vegetation cover, heat escapes rapidly, causing sharp drops in temperature. 10 days without trees, the planet's water systems begin to show severe signs of disturbance. The aerial rivers, atmospheric moisture currents that were previously maintained by forests, begin to fail. Regions that depended on this air-transported moisture for their rainfall experience unprecedented drought. In watersheds, the effects are devastating. Rivers that maintained their flow thanks to the gradual release of water stored in the soil by the tree roots begin to show extreme variations. During rains, without the natural interception of canopies and root absorption, waters run rampant, causing flash floods. In dry periods, the flow decreases dramatically, ceasing in some cases. Underground aquifers, which were previously slowly replenished through infiltration facilitated by tree roots, begin to show signs of depletion. Cities that depend on these underground reserves for water supply face the first crises of scarcity. The absence of trees triggers a chain reaction in global food production. Crops that depended on pollinators, many of which had trees as their natural habitat, begin to fail. The production of fruits, nuts, and seeds plummets. It is estimated that about 75% of the world's major food crops depend to some degree on animal pollination. Small-scale agriculture, especially in tropical regions, is particularly affected. Traditional cultivation systems, which for centuries depended on the protection and nutrients provided by trees, collapse. The soil, previously enriched by the natural fall of leaves and organic matter from trees, begins to rapidly lose its fertility. In the oceans, effects begin to manifest in unexpected ways. Increased surface runoff carries unprecedented amounts of sediment to the seas, affecting coastal ecosystems. Coral reefs, already stressed by ocean warming, suffer even more from increased water turbidity. The consequences for human health become increasingly evident. Air quality in urban areas reaches dangerous levels. Without trees to filter pollutants and suspended particles, rates of respiratory diseases skyrocket. Hospitals record a significant increase in cases of asthma, allergies, and other respiratory conditions. Heat stress becomes a major concern in urban areas. Without tree shade and their cooling effect through evapotranspiration, temperatures in cities rise to dangerous levels. The number of heat-related deaths increases dramatically, especially among the elderly and vulnerable people. The population's mental health is also affected. Previous studies had already demonstrated the importance of trees and green spaces for psychological well-being. With their absence, there is a significant increase in cases of anxiety, depression, and other mental disorders. Faced with this unprecedented crisis, the global scientific community mobilizes in a race against time. Laboratories around the world accelerate research on carbon capture and air purification technologies. Artificial photosynthesis projects, previously considered experimental, receive urgent attention and funding. Engineers and architects begin developing new solutions to mitigate the effects of the tree absence in cities. Artificial shading structures, air purification systems, and water management technologies are implemented on an emergency basis. However, it becomes increasingly clear that artificially reproducing all ecosystem services provided by trees is a practically impossible task. After 30 days without trees, human society begins to reorganize in the face of the new reality. Governments worldwide declare a permanent state of emergency. New legislation is hastily approved to regulate the use of remaining stocks of wood and forest products. The price of basic items such as paper, furniture, and building materials reaches stratospheric levels. In large cities, massive urban adaptation programs are initiated. Artificial shading structures are erected over streets and squares. Misting systems are installed to try to reproduce the cooling effect previously provided by trees. Solar panels and green awnings cover buildings in a desperate attempt to regulate urban temperature. Coastal communities face new challenges. Without tree roots to hold the soil, coastal erosion accelerates dramatically. Coastal cities begin to build artificial barriers to contain the advancing sea. But the absence of mangroves, once natural guardians of the coasts, makes this task increasingly difficult. The agricultural sector undergoes a forced revolution. Vertical farms in controlled environments proliferate, trying to compensate for the loss of natural growing conditions. New protected agriculture techniques are hastily developed. Climate-controlled, greenhouses become the norm for crops that previously depended on the microclimate provided by trees. Scientists work frenetically to develop crop varieties more resistant to the new extreme climate conditions. Genetic engineering gains even more importance in the search for plants capable of surviving in a world without trees. However, the cost of food production skyrockets, leading to an unprecedented global food crisis. The absence of trees causes profound cultural and psychological changes in society. Rituals and cultural traditions centered on sacred trees or ancestral groves are forced to adapt. Indigenous and traditional communities which maintained a deep spiritual connection with forests face an unprecedented identity crisis. Artists and writers begin to portray a new type of nostalgia, the longing for trees. Songs, paintings, and books celebrate the memory of lost forests. Children born after the disappearance know trees only through digital records and stories told by elders. Species that survived the initial disappearance of trees begin to show surprising adaptive behaviors. Some birds start building nests in artificial structures. Certain primates develop new behavior patterns to survive on the ground. However, extinction rates remain alarming. Pollinating insects that survived adapt to new food sources, but their populations remain a fraction of what they were before. The complex web of life, built over millions of years of evolution with trees as central elements, continues to unravel. The global crisis catalyzes an unprecedented wave of technological innovation. Scientists develop artificial trees, mechanical structures capable of capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, albeit with much lower efficiency than their natural counterparts. Air purification systems based on algae and other organisms are installed in urban centers. Biotechnology companies work on developing genetically modified organisms capable of performing some of the ecological functions of trees. However, it becomes increasingly clear that artificially replicating the complexity of ecosystem services provided by trees is a practically impossible task. As humanity adapts to this new world, the magnitude of what was lost becomes painfully clear. Trees were not just natural resources or landscape elements. They were evolutionary partners that shaped our planet and our very existence over hundreds of millions of years. The absence of trees forces humanity to confront profound questions about our relationship with nature. Technology can replace some functions of trees, but it cannot recreate the complexity, beauty, and interconnection they represented in the fabric of life on Earth. This thought experiment shows us that trees are much more than passive elements of our landscape. They are fundamental pillars of life on Earth. Their absence would cause such profound changes to our planet that the world as we know it would become practically unrecognizable. The message is clear. Trees are not just resources to be exploited, but essential partners in our planetary journey. Their preservation is not just a matter of environmental conservation, but of survival for human civilization itself. Each tree that remains standing is a guardian of our future, a living reminder of our dependence on the natural systems that sustain life on Earth. While we still have our trees, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to protect them, thus preserving not only themselves, but the entire intricate fabric of life of which we are a part.